larger picture of the performance measures, how you guys are going to be, you know, graded basically through our performance that are required through WIOA, and then talk about the measurable skill gains and then work on the exit. So Paula, if you're ready, we'll go ahead and start with your presentation if you want to share your screen.
Sure. Hi, my sheet, can you see the PowerPoint?
Not yet.
Okay.
I don't
now. Can you?
It's coming up. It looks like has started sharing screen. There we go. You're on.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Okay. I apologize for the date being off. That's the last time we presented this PowerPoint. And as far as I know, everyone on the call today is serving all in-school youth. So
they will have out of school too.
Out of school youth.
Yeah, in school and out of school. They could be both.
So we're looking at in-school, your in-school youth will all be in the measures that we're about to talk about. Your out of school youth, who you register in WIOA funded training, will go into these measures as well. But they will all be in the employment and education measures, and I'll explain those in a minute. I'm going to skip through to the youth participant part. So once your customers are registered, they'll be included in performance, and it's important to know that, as the PowerPoint states, I'm putting on hands-free. Even if you lose contact with your youth participant, once they're in performance, they'll stay in performance. So, for example, and I think, Tammy, you updated this, if you determine at the beginning of the grant that you're serving 50 youth and they're registered, regardless of what happens with their plans, if they drop out, they're still going to be in performance. So none of you will be managing performance. It's just good to be aware of what you're on the hook for as far as your youth go when they exit the program. And we'll talk about exits in another time. So there are 4 measures that you're going to be concerned with when you're looking at your youth after they exit. There's employment in the 2nd quarter after they exit, employment in the 4th quarter after they exit, the credential attainment rate, and the measurable skills gains. Hello?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay, I heard some background noise. Okay, so the employment rate, 2nd quarter after exit. For youth, this could be whether they're entered in employment or in post-secondary education. So if you all have access to the PowerPoint, it's the percentage of youth who are in education or training or in unsubsidized employment, meaning not supplemental, during the 2nd quarter after they exit the program. So you have to stick with them for this measure. They have to, after you exit them, it's 2 quarters out. You'll be able to update their outcomes. I'm assuming, I don't know how many of you have access to IWS, by sending a case note. If you realize that during your follow-up, if they weren't in post-secondary when they exited, but they got themselves into post-secondary education, that will be an outcome for them. So you'll want to keep track of that, as well as if they're in supplemental education, supplemental employment. If they're out on their own and they can provide you with a tax document, you can record that, and that will give them an outcome for employment as well. And this measure follows the same exact methodology and the same rules. So it tracks them out to the 4th quarter. So basically a year after you exit them, if they're in post-secondary education or employment or supplemental employment, they will give you a positive outcome that far after you exit them. So with youth, you'll be doing follow-up with all of them. But in some instances where you completely lose contact with them, if they have employment, our system will pull in their wages. The goal is to get them employment or training that's directly related to what you trained them in, but that's how our system works for these measures. So all of your youth will be in those measures, as well as all of your in-school youth will be in this third credential attainment rate measure. If you have any youth who are out of school and they come in and you, for some reason, you never put them in a WIOA funded training, they won't hit this measure. But basically, I think with your grants, they're probably going to end up going into training. So these youth who are enrolled in education or in training, except for OJTs and customized training, need to attain a recognized post-secondary credential or certificate or a secondary school diploma within 1 year after they exit the program or any time during the program. So you could be working with them, they get a certificate, that will count for your positive in this measure, or once they exit, if they come to you and have attained a certificate in that whole year, they'll count for a positive outcome for your program. So you have 360 days after you exit them. So I don't know who's working in IWDS because they're recorded differently, but you'll have to have a copy of the credential in the file. And I went over this, who is included in this credential attainment rate. So all your in-school youth, any out of school who you enroll in occupational skills training, secondary education at or above the 9th grade level. So that is not determined by the tests they take, the TABE test. It's based on the grade level they're in. If they go into post-secondary education, adult education, youth build, or job corps, they're all going to be pulled into this measure and you'll be on the hook for them to get a credential. The credentials, I think you guys all have a good idea of what credentials they'll be going for, but it needs to be a recognized post-secondary credential defined as a credential consisting of an industry-recognized certificate or certification of completion, for example, of an apprenticeship, a license recognized by the state or federal government, or an associate or bachelor's degree. Does anyone have any questions about this measure? Who's in, who's out? Okay.
Hey, Paula, also I muted some of the phones just to make sure that there wasn't background noise, but everyone at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to hover over it, and there's a chat. So, you know, if you want me to take certain times and unmute everybody, I can most definitely do that. You know, just let me know, or you can, you know, put in the chat that, you know, you want your phone unmuted, something like that.
Okay, or and I have our contact numbers at the end of this PowerPoint. So anyone who has any questions about any of this with specific examples of your customers, you can just email us, because there are different scenarios with different customers. So this is a list of the types of credentials that your customer attains. They will count as a positive for this measure. Secondary school diploma, associate's degree, bachelor's degree, graduate degree, occupational licensure, occupational certificates that include registered apprenticeship and career and technical education certificates, occupational certification. Certified nursing assistant is a good example of a certificate that would meet the definition, as well as automotive service excellence certification. So one example that there were questions about was a forklift operator, and they have determined that that is a certificate that would count. And then what types do not count? So an OSHA 10-hour course that provides awareness of job-related common safety and health hazards, that will not be count it. If you have that certificate, it will not validate a credential for that measure. Any work readiness certificates, food handler, CPR certifications, just those types of classes that aren't an intensive course of tests and weeks of training, those, while they're good to have along the way, they will not validate the credential for WIOA performance. The fourth measure is called Measurable Skills Gains, and this is the percentage of your participants who go into an education or training. So again, all of your youth who come in-school youth will be in this measure. The out-of-school youth that go into WIOA training will be put in this measure. Again, if you have an out-of-school youth who for some reason you bring in and they're never enrolled in a WIOA-funded training, you won't be on the hook for them for this measure. So it's different because these measurable skill gains are entered manually. The system doesn't just calculate it as it would if your participant is earning wages in unsubsidized employment and after they exit in the second or fourth quarter, those will be pulled in. For the measurable skills gains, you'll need to manually enter, and I'll go over this, 4 types of them. Now, when your participants are tested, if they achieve an EFL gain of even 1 level, our system will calculate that, and you'll automatically have a measurable skill gain for them for that program year. If they are in 2 years, that next year, if they don't achieve another gain on a test, they will have to have one of the 5 types of measurable skill gains, and there are several different ways you can get these. So again, this is just going over who is in the measure. I'm assuming that most of your customers will be in all of these. So the EFL, as I described, attainment of a secondary school diploma, so high school, secondary, post-secondary transcript for a sufficient number of credit hours. So they don't have to graduate, but if they have a transcript, so for secondary, it just has to be a transcript or report card for 1 semester of high school. If they're in post-secondary, it needs to be at least 12 hours per semester. So in the file, you would have that documentation of their transcript with those 12 hours in order to record a measurable skill gain. So as far as the rest, they can have a satisfactory or better progress report towards established milestones, such as completion of OJT or 1 year of an apprenticeship, and it does not have to be 1 year. These are just milestones, and they could have successful passage of an exam that's required for a particular occupation, and this is not like the credential measure. So to record these measurable skills gains, they don't have to have the industry recognized credential or certificate. It could just be tests and achievements along the way to getting that credential. So in a way, this measure, I think as far as validation and performance in it, is easier than the credential. So that's my number. I'm Paula Berry. I should have introduced myself. I'm sorry. And Neely Schlosser. And for these specific scenarios, you can just email or call either one of us if you have any questions. And I'm just going to go back over. I know that here, there was one document that is described as a handout, and it goes in depth with about each type of measurable skill gain. So you can get the gain for their test, achieving a gain in the EFL, the gain for a secondary or post-secondary transcript, so a gain for being in high school with a successful report card, or college with the 12 credit hours on a transcript, or a training milestone which wasn't labeled, and I'm sorry about that, but that's where they could have a progress report, even from an employer. If they can prove that they got a raise somewhere along the way, that actually would indicate that they had a training milestone, because we would assume that the raise in pay indicates that they increased in a skill level, and then the skills progression or diploma is where you would have an exam, any benchmark that's related to a training along the way. So if you have someone who has a credential that you have in the file and that you've entered, somewhere along the way they should have a document that could validate that, which would be your MSG. So if you're looking and you see that your youth has a credential, make sure that you go back and validate one of these 5 types of MSGs. You won't have to validate the EFL, but obviously if you know they're in high school, you can validate the secondary, college, the post-secondary. If they're in training with an employer or an OJT, you guys will have a lot of these just based on your grants. You'll probably always have the documentation for an MSG. So I think that wraps it up if no one has any questions, or if they rather just email Neely and I with specific scenarios if you have any questions. This is a new measure out of all 4 of the measures I just explained. This is a benchmark, so no one has a goal for it. We're just collecting data at this point, and there's a lot of gray area. People are always wondering what this would fall under. For your youth who need to be in employment or education in the 2nd and 4th quarters, as well as the credentials, there are goals for that. So just be aware when you're exiting your youth.
Hey, and Paula, there's a couple people. I'll go ahead and unmute everybody. Okay. Because I know I just unmuted everybody's phones and microphones. But there was an example or a question about, is there an example of out of youth not included in an MSG, one who may only be in work experience? And then also they'd like to see the number back on the slide. Plus, just to remind everybody that this PowerPoint that Paul is using was emailed out to everyone, and it's also available in the partner guide. But just let everyone know the phones are unmuted, so you can ask any questions.
I have a question. This is Natasha from Phalanx. Some of our youth who have gone through our YCAP training and is specific towards construction, they've started, I don't want to say self-employed because obviously they're not an LLC yet, but 2 of my youth just started working for themselves. And there's not really a way that I could capture that, in a sense. I did have one youth come and he filled out in a test form stating how much he was making doing the jobs that he was doing. He started painting and doing drywall, and that was based upon the training that he received. So I'm not sure if that's like another gray area or, yeah.
Yes, and I went through it pretty fast because I just want to give other people a chance to explain the rest of it. So for that youth, that's a type of supplemental employment. So it's subsidized employment that we won't get their wage record, but it is allowed for the purpose of tracking their employment. So what you'll want to do, I don't know if you have access to IWDS.
Yes, I do.
You do?
Yeah,
Okay.
I put it in.
So,
yeah.
Have they exited yet?
Yes, because he was working as a valet when he got out the program, and then he started working for himself. And so I even got one of his cards that he passes out to people, and had him fill out the attest form stating that how much he was making a month doing construction work. Okay,
and then what? For example, when did he exit? What was his exit date?
I would say that would be, I want to say 6th. June or July. Okay. And so this would be a 4th quarter report. Would that be how it works? For
so in that quarter, for his post, if he still is working for himself and attest to it within this quarter, if he exited in June or in October, this would be his post
Okay.
to exit quarter. So this would be where you want to document that.
Okay.
So his employment is recognized, since we won't be able to pick up wages for it. In IWDS, when you go to the exit control panel, and you can call me or email me, and I'll walk you through it if you need to, but it's also in one of the handouts, how to enter supplemental. You just update that second quarter, and I won't go into it. You can just call me, because I don't know if I don't know how many people on the call use workNet or iWIDS.
Okay, thank you so much.
Just call me if you have any problems entering the supplemental. It'll calculate it, and the job will have to be added.
Okay, cool beans.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And we did have a question that says, is an example of an out-of-school youth not included in an MSG one who may only be in work experience? So if they're only in work experience, is that included as an MSG?
Okay, so that's their only IWDS, that's their only service. And yes, because it depends. Okay, is that the service they're entered in to be registered in?
Work experience, correct.
Then yes. And you know what I need to send, Tammy, and I will send out a list of the services that qualify them for MSG.
Okay, that would be great. And we'll post those in the partner resources also. So make sure to look in the partner resources, and we'll send that out. Paula will give that to us, and we'll send it out to you guys.
Yeah, it's the qualifying training and education services that if they're enrolled in this, they will go into that measure, as well as credential.
Okay, does anybody else have any other questions related to the performance? Like I said, we're just giving you a high level. We have had some questions related to this, and we just want to make sure you're aware that, you know, this information is what the state's being judged on. And then your performance rate is based upon the local performance negotiated rate. So we just wanted to make you aware of this. So, and especially like you said, after Paula has talked about, after you exit customers, it doesn't mean you're done with them. You still have that follow-up. And then you can still document, you know, any changes in their status with MSGs or credentials after exiting. So you want to make sure that you're documenting this information so that you guys get credit, and then ultimately the state gets credit for the work that everybody's doing. So we're going to move on. Natasha's going to talk about exiting, and we've had a lot of questions of how we exit customers. Now, there's two different environments. One of them is if you are working in IWDS and have access to that, you're going to exit the customers like you traditionally do in IWDS. For those grantees that are partnering with LWIA to exit, we need to exit those customers also, and we need to communicate that to your LWIA of how to exit those. So Natasha's going to share her screen and show you how to exit, and then we're going to also show you the exit. You know, what you have to have two things. You have to know where the student is in school, and also the reason for exit. So we're going to show you those also, and those are also available in the information that I provided to you guys.
Okay, so Paul, if you want to stop sharing your screen.
Okay.
Okay.
Off. Okay.
So as far as letting, if you're entering the exit information into IWDS, then of course you just go ahead and do that like you normally would. If you don't have access to IWDS and you want to, and you need to tell, the LWIA that it's time to exit the person, then what we want to do is we're just using the features that we already have in the system, which is reminders about the case note. We have added an area here that just says exit. So you just enter the task as exit, and then you can say the subject is, exiting the customer, and then include the information that is needed, about that person when they're exiting, kind of what their situation is. And then what I would do is save the case note. Oh, wait a minute, hold on. I just do this one. Send as an L&I WorkNet message and email, and you can send it to the appropriate WIOA person that has access to this information, you know, this customer. And then what it will do, well, it will save it as a case note in the customer's file, which populates L&I WorkNet. It also populates IWDS, and it will also send them an email message to let them know that this person is ready for exit. That's really about it. You can do it from the case note tab, or you can do it from, you know, the other pages, the progress page as well.
Natasha, could you pull up the exit reasons too, so they can see those? So when you're entering these case notes, you're going, like she said, you're going to add a case note. It's going to be exit, and then the status, the subject would be exiting a customer, and then there's 2 pieces of information that the LWIA needs to have so that they know what to put into IWDS system. And she's in the partner resource tools right now. Oops, was.
Yeah,
so this is where you can find this also. So when you're entering your case note, what they need to know is the school status at exit. Oh, sorry, there we go. So this is your partner resources, and then this document is right down there, youth exit reasons. So when you're entering your case note, what you need to do is you pick exit. You said, you know, your subject would be customer exiting or exiting customer. And then you need to provide them with the school status at exit. So that is one of these, you know, 5 choices here. They're in school, alternative school, in school, high school or less. You need to pick one of those categories and include it as this, because this is the information that is in the IWDS system. So you want to include the text the way it's shown here, so that when you're sending that to your counterpart at the LWIA, they know what to select in the system. So they need to know that information, and then they need to know an exit reason. And then there's a list of exit reasons below that. So you need to select one of these exit reasons. Then the thing is, you need to also make sure you're documenting. So if you're saying they attained a high school diploma, you need to make sure you're documenting that in your customer files, and you can also upload that in the customer upload section too, so you have all the documentation within their client file in or in the WorkNet system. So you need to make sure that the exit reason is supported by documentation.
Yes, for sure. And I would use the exact wording from this list.
So an example would be in school, high school or less, and then, well, Paula, you give an example. You're probably better at this exit than I am.
Oh, my only example was, as far as documentation, if they are not in school, high school graduate, and they graduated during your program while you were serving them, then your documentation would be their credential, obviously. So it would be documentation for their school status at exit, documentation for their credential, and an MSG along the way. So the only other are these reasons: criminal offender, deceased, family care. Those are global exclusions, is what they're called. And you would have to have documentation, but if that's their exit reason, in hopefully few cases, they will not be in your performance outcomes at all. It removes them from WIOA performance. Just when you see the list, if you wonder, that's
they would not be included in performance.
Yes.
So then, Paula, an example you were giving, if they had a customer that they were working with and then they could no longer locate, but then, and so they exited them, and then they later on located them, and they found out that they were in, you know, in school. Would they add that as a measurable skill gain? Or could they change that exit?
No, the exit, once you exit them, we can't change the exit reason. However, if you have to exit them because you haven't talked to them and there's no two-way communication in 90 days, so they're exited, and that exit reason will never change. But if they come back after, say their fourth quarter, they come for some reason, in follow-up, you can get a hold of them, and they say, look, I'm in post-secondary school now. You can enter that information and follow up regardless of what reason you exited them with. Does that make sense?
Yes, and would that be counted as a measurable skill gain?
That example, even if their exit reason is cannot locate and they come in and have a post-secondary education, that would actually count for your fourth quarter employment measure, because you can be in education or employment to give you a positive for the second and fourth employment and education measures.
So the main thing is, in follow-up, try to make sure to continue on with these customers and locate them. And you can still add any of your measurable skill gains and your credentials after. After. And measurable skill gain, and Paula, correct me if I'm wrong, but they have to have a measurable skill gain, at least one each year.
During the program year that they exit in. So if they are enrolled, for example, today, and they get a measurable skill gain, their test, they increase a grade level. For this year, so it goes from 7-1 to 6:30, that would calculate their MSG. For next year, if they don't exit by next July, and this is also someone who's in a training, who you put in training, they'll go in the measure. And if they're not exited by 6:30 of next year, they'll roll over into the next performance year, the MSG. So then they need to get another MSG for that program year. It's not exit based. The credential measure is different, where it's from when they exited, they have 365 days to get their credential. So the system isn't looking at if you exited them as other services not completed, for example, because they left, they don't want to have anything to do with the program, and even though they're supposed to, and I'm thinking this won't happen a lot, if they come back almost a year later and say they got a credential, they graduated on their own, they went through nursing school somehow on their own, or finished something up that you started and they never finished while you were working with them in the program, you would enter their credential and you would get credit for that because you have a whole year. That's why follow-up is so important. So you might never know they have a credential if you're not following up.
And keeping in contact with the customers. Then.
Yeah, which is hard when you can't locate them and they don't talk to you for so long that you have to go ahead and exit them because of the 90-day rule. I understand that, but just so you know, just because that's how you exited doesn't mean that performance won't be calculated if they come back and give you that documentation.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions related to the topics that we covered? Like I said, I know Paul has worked with a couple of you guys that you guys have had questions related to the MSGs and the exiting. And I know that, a lot of our customers should be getting to the point of the exit status. And I know we have some that already exited. So we just wanted to follow up and make sure that you guys understood, the performance and how it affects, you guys, and also affects us at the, the state level. And then what the MSGs are and the documentation, to support that. And then also the exit reasons. And once again, you have to have documentation to support everything that you're indicating. So make sure that you have your documentation that supports that also. Are there any other questions? If not, I think that's pretty much what we wanted to cover today.
I have one question. Who is asking about the service list with the work-based training? Someone was. And I don't know, I can't remember.
Oh, let me see in the chat.
Seeing it something, and I can't remember if they were talking about the credential.
Isn't it out-of-school youth that is only in work experience included in the MSG?
And because it's OJT, we're revisiting the service list, and policy is working on a new policy to come out, and there is a list attached to that policy, and we're revising this list just based on definitions. So I'm going to send it out, and it says the following out-of-school youth, the following services for out-of-school youth, we'll put them in the credential measure. The following services for out-of-school youth, we'll put them in the MSG measure, just so you have it for reference. And that's what I'm sending to you, Tammy.
Okay. That sounds great. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, we're going to call it for today. I appreciate everybody getting on the call. And then we'll see you on the next Wednesday webinar. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.